Okay, good morning everybody. We'll about to start, or we will convene to consider the second stream of submissions to the proposed district plan. And those topics involved will broadly be zoning, airport zone, this will be in order, airport zone, town centre zone, local centre, neighbourhood centre zone, mixed use zone, field day zone, Camp Columba zone, natural open zone and sport and recreation zone. And we will start off by getting some more information from the property group planners. So I'll hand over to you, I believe.
So we're just going to hear first in relation to the rule for the town centre zone, I gather, with regard to the 100 square metre requirement.
Yes, did you want us to run through all the responses for minute 10 first, or just that one?
We'll run through them topic by topic, so we'll deal with questions and presentation from you guys on a topic by topic basis. I think it's the only way we're going to keep control of 9 different things going on in our heads. Simple for you guys, you've got 1 or 2 each.
Okay, so I'll just hand you over to Tina Carlson-McCall.
Yes, sure. So, will do. Thank you. Yes, my name is Tina Carlson-McCall. I've been the lead planner for the commercial centres. And with us online, we've got Ruth Allen, who's our urban regeneration expert. So with the submissions and in the section 42, a report on paragraph 164 for the commercial centres and mixed use, there is the submission from Clark Fortune MacDonald in relation to standard 1, which is in relation to activities in the core precinct. The rule has a 10-metre shop frontage width restriction and a 100 square metre footprint. And the panel asked for some further information about the background to this. So Ruth has provided further information about that, and that's included as Appendix 5 into the supplementary evidence.
So can you take us through that, please? We haven't had an opportunity of reading it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I might just hand over to Ruth, as she's the one that's provided the evidence for that. So my updated recommendation on the stand that follows is shown in Appendix 2, but we can go through that after. So over to you, Ruth.
And where's that, sorry, there's likely to be interruptions, I do apologise. Where's that further information?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, in the supplementary evidence, if you, it's starting at paragraph 79, so it's right at the end. We're going back to front.
Thank you, Ruth. Do continue. Paragraph 79 refers to updated memo at Appendix 5. Where do I find Appendix 5?
We sent that on Friday. Just check the website if it's on there.
I think what we might do is we'll deal with issues now, but if we can set some time aside this afternoon, set a time to come back once we've had an opportunity of reading that over the lunchtime. So I'll just wait for everyone else to catch up, and then we'll hear what people have got to say, or Ruth's got to say on the 100 square metres. You guys ready?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Ruth, the 100 square metres. With the pictures, yes. Thank you.
Ruth, do you mind zooming in on it, because it's quite small on the screen? So if you can make yours bigger, that would be fantastic. That's really good. Thank you.
square metre floor plates for large floor plate retail, which would not be suitable for the town centre. And I'm comfortable that if we allow 250 square metre floor plates, the 10 metre provision would encourage that fine grain retail to locate in the town centre. So that I think that's been reflected in Tina's supplementary evidence. And if you would like to see some of the areas of these buildings, I can share my screen and show that as well, if that would be helpful.
No, that's fine. We'll read through it later.
Just a question. Does that 250 square metres, does that include the back space, like fitting rooms and toilets, etc., or is that over and above back space?
It's only the areas, I think the way the rule's drafted, it's only the areas that are open to the public. So yes, fitting rooms, but not storerooms. So I've had a really good look at retail spaces that are currently for lease. A lot of them do appear to be sort of above 250, but that's because they include considerable warehousing at the back to current spaces that are listed and office spaces above. I am comfortable that 250 reflects what's currently on the market. So yes, it's only areas open to the public, and it would mean that it encourages those smaller goods, retail goods or uses, rather than sort of large appliances uses in the town centre.
So in terms of your question, yes, that area would include changing rooms because it's accessible to the public. I don't know if any of the planners present have been subject to the legal submissions in the Environment Court, which are quite lengthy over the meaning of the word or. In some contexts, or means and it's dependent upon the words that precede it. Therefore, where you have a rule that says shall not exceed something or something else, it means and. So if you don't comply with one of them, you need a consent. So the way that that's worded. I guess my two questions. So there's a limit on the size of shops in the central area. There is no limit on the size of shops in the local retail areas.
The same standard is in the local centre zone too.
And the neighbourhood ones?
Not the neighbourhood zones, no. And the reason for that was because the area of those zones are really small anyway. It kind of gave a natural extent and limitation on them, but in the local centre zone and the town centre zone, there is this standard that tries to encourage fine grain retail.
So I guess conceptually, when you look at a number of the existing shops, or a number of shops in Gore, Mataura in particular, which are of the smaller size, that are struggling financially or already closed, what is the economic implication of reducing the size of the stores? Probably our biggest one in town was the H&J Smith store, which wouldn't have complied with this rule, and that's closed down. So how do you, I guess, respond to my concerns that by limiting the size of shops, you're actually going to discourage retailing from locating in Gore, and in an area where we are pedestrian oriented in our main street, that's where shops would want to locate in order to get the custom, yet they're required to go through a resource consent. So what are the economic implications of actually a rule of this type?
Ruth can help me out here as well, but the rules are really around what is already on the ground. It's not seeking to ask everyone for a resource consent, it is anticipated that most would actually already comply with this rule. So we're just trying to keep the character as it is and try and have like those smaller retail tenancies where there's pedestrian frontages, and bigger retail stores can go in the outer areas to support that vibrancy is the intention of it.
So existing use, like the H&J, that even if it changed ownership, it would still wouldn't need a resource consent because of existing use?
So if there is an existing use in it, if there is, it would have existing use, right? So the way we've worded it is if you're doing a new, like, internal alteration, then the square meterage and the shop width comes in. But if you're taking over an existing space and you're doing the same or a similar activity, then you would likely have existing use rights.
So if one of the smaller shops wanted to, below the standard that's now set, wanted to take out some of its storage space at the rear and turn it into retail, are you saying they need a resource consent?
Only if it made it a bigger, more than 250 square meters, and it's probably unlikely, but.
Yeah, but it isn't the number increase, it's the effect of the increase, isn't it, in terms of existing use rights? So how would a small shop expanding actually change the intensity of use?
I might be able to help out here. I think that the issue is if a small shop wanted to expand and it was under the 250 square metre limit, then they could do that as a permitted activity under the current plan, so that you don't need to rely on existing use rights. It would only be if a building was above 250 square metres and they wanted to operate in a similar way to what they do now, then that would be covered by existing use rights and they wouldn't need a resource consent. Is that the thrust of it, Tina?
Yes. So if you're a smaller shop and you want to extend, that would be fine, and unless of course you went over the 250, in which case you need to go through a resource consent process. But any retail activity under the 250 would not need a resource consent, and that's only for the tenancy, so the area open to the public. So it's not the actual building; it's the activity itself. So it's the actual shop front rather than all the storage and that out the back.
Thank you. I've got no more questions.
So for our administration person, I'm wondering if we can slot in for 3 o'clock to come back, and if we've got any questions in terms of that report, please. Ruth, does that suit you to come back at 3 o'clock?
It's fine, yes.
Okay.
Right. Have we got more information to consider with the airport zone, or will you just...
Hi, that's you.
Need to hold it down until the red light flashes and then do it again.
Okay, hi. That's me. I'm Mishka Barnheedy and I authored the Section 42 for the airport zone. In terms of the further information requested through the panel within minute 10, Neil from Gore District Council has provided some information on the current firefighting capacity in the zone. So there's two 30,000 litre tanks available now, both with couplings for the fire brigade to connect to. So that's just the only additional information. And then I will take my section 42A as read. Just as a bit of an overview, the majority of the submissions on the zone there's similar themes throughout. So I believe Victoria will be addressing some of those, particularly relating to FENS and servicing. In terms of the more specific submissions on the airport zone, relocated buildings, we've given relief to that submission. They're now permitted. And there is a submission requesting a noise overlay over the airport. That's being deferred to the noise chapter to be addressed then. And that's it from me, if you have any questions.
I've got no questions. Other panel members?
Thank you. My understanding is that you need two 45-litre tanks for FENS.
I'm not sure of the specific provisions. I can come back to you with an overview. The existing development at the airport has gone through the building consent process and presumably reflects those requirements, but I can do some digging for you if you like.
No, it is fine. I just wondered about that. I know the new rule is 245, so they'll be existing.
Yeah.
Under
Yeah.
existing
So
rule.
any new development would need to catch up with the Building Act requirements, but I think Victoria can probably expand on our sort of recommendations more generally on the FEN submission.
So if there was a relocated building, would that mean that they'd have to comply with the new consent?
Yes. Yeah.
Whose responsibility is it to provide the tanks? I'm assuming the answer is the landowner. All of the land is owned by the council and one lot with leases for the occupants of buildings. So how would the rule you're suggesting apply?
Victoria, you might want to jump in there, if possible.
I don't think we've proposed a rule for the airport zone for firefighting. So FENS provided a submission which sought to add a servicing standard similar to what we've already got in the notified plan in the residential zone, but they also sought to have an additional condition which was compliance with their code of practice. The code of practice is quite a long document and it's got a number of different requirements. So our recommendation was that having a condition requiring compliance with the code of practice wasn't particularly effective or efficient for plan users and decision makers. And so we did invite FENS to provide us with something that might be a little bit more sort of user-friendly to put in the plan, but we haven't had any evidence from them to come back on that. So we didn't actually recommend putting a condition that required compliance with the code of practice in the zones.
Thank you. I should have prefaced it by acknowledging what your recommendation was, but from the point of view of FENS, if we went that way, yeah. The now, at paragraph 57, it talks about temporary activities. Chapter contains a rule for relocated buildings, and a couple of questions about relocated buildings. So that rule isn't subject to any submissions. So I guess my question is that rule now operative?
Operative or legal effect?
Yeah, I'm not too sure which is the correct word, but is it now in force?
If there's no submissions on a provision, then it effectively becomes operative. but the council has to go through a process of confirming or adopting the parts of the plan that are effectively operative, as I understand it. So would they need a resource consent? It's in effect, basically.
Yeah, so if it's in effect, they don't need a resource consent.
That's correct if they needed a consent under the operative, the old plan.
Yeah.
They don't need one now.
Right, okay. Secondly, and it comes up in the number of the reports, and at paragraph 61, the recommendation is to add the word relocated. So in every zone, we're going to see a report that says add relocated to umpteen rules. I guess from a decision-making or decision-writing point of view, having repetitive things like that is probably, I guess, frustrating for those writing reports as well as those preparing decisions. And I'm just wondering whether, in fact, we can't take all those rules and deal with them in one go rather than having them 20 different times coming up. So I guess I'll be looking at Matt in terms of the way we deal with them in a decision. I guess in a report you've still got to acknowledge that, and it'd be helpful to do it at the beginning of the report, saying, look, there's 6 rules dealt with in this report that are identical to our recommendations in other reports. Here they are, and just set them aside to make it easier. But it occurred to me that rather than adding that word to every rule, why don't we just change the definition of building so it includes new, relocated and extended buildings?
I think the definition of building is the National Planning Standard definition, so we can't change it.
Is it mandatory to use the ones, because a lot of our definitions don't use the National Planning Standards?
They use them where they have to. So the National Planning Standards, it isn't a complete list of definitions, but where I'm pretty sure where there are National Planning Standard definitions, we've used them.
Okay, can we just have it checked that it's mandatory to use them?
Yeah, we can.
Please. The other thing is, what is a relocated building? Now, I can understand a house has been used for 20 years, is picked up and moved somewhere else. That's a relocated building. We had a business here in town that built new buildings on their site, picked them up and took them somewhere else. Is that a relocated building? You would think so.
You would think so, but it's prefabricated, so it's like a new building really, and it's just, if it's manufactured off-site and then brought to site, then I would say that's a new building, not relocated. There is somewhere that...
I think probably including it in here, whether it's in the definition as you've suggested or in the rule, covers it anyway. It's a building, it's a relocated building, you know, it sort of cuts out any grey.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if this business, which has now been defunct for a number of years, wanted to set up somewhere else, it's probably the question they'll be asking.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons that we did include the word relocated into every activity rule is that so it's really clear for someone whether their building is new or been relocated in some respect, then it's clear that the rules are allowing for that.
Forest and Bird also have a whole series of submission points. And I'm not too sure if they lodged one submission point or lodged 30 or more submission points that asks for the word environmental values to be added and for the words river and stream to come out. And I guess there are 2 questions, of which I'll leave the first one to you, Glenys.
What I was wondering was the word environment. I see that you say it's too broad, so you would have to say natural environment, but could that word not be included in this?
I mean, we can. So the concern with that is that the airport's designed to be quite enabling, and where specific sort of environmental concerns, you know, they're managed through the district-wide chapters anyway, with the eco chapter, with the outstanding natural landscapes, with stream setbacks. So we wanted to be a little bit more specific. If there's an aspect that's not being controlled, then we need a bit more specificity around that. Otherwise, it's sort of it's an enabling chapter, and we don't want it to be confused through the consenting process unless it's very clear what values we're trying to protect and where. That was the reasoning behind that.
So that is just in this particular zone?
I haven't considered it in the other zones because this is what I'm authoring, but yes, I did think about it in the airport context for this particular request from.
Are there any rivers or streams in the airport zone?
No.
So do we need those words?
That was just to be consistent with making sure it was in all zones, but yes, I mean, potentially we don't need those words. Yeah.
I just have a question. What if the airport was to expand?
If the airport was to expand beyond the zone boundaries, then it would need a resource consent under the relevant zone, which I believe would be the rural chapter. So that would just need to be assessed on its merits, or they could come in for a zone change if they wanted to. But yeah.
Looking at Appendix A. Now, there's and I'm looking at page 4 of Appendix A, and the first one is a style question that seems relatively simple. That residential activity one for all areas in number 1 talks about permitted by Rule 1 to Rule 3, but the style through much of the plan is as per number 3 there, where it lists standard 1, 2, 3 and 4. So from a style point of view, is there any issue if we simplify all those things by just saying standard 1 through to standard 4?
I think I might have to have a bit of a think to make sure there's no unintended consequences with that and respond in the right of reply.
Yeah, just would make it easier for users of the plan. Now, interestingly, do we have a copy of the plan here? We didn't bring them through today. Over there. So looking at the visitor accommodation rule, number 2 refers to any habitable room complies with noise standard 3, acoustic treatment. And if I go to page 304 of the plan, yes, so noise standard S3 says that the internal noise levels shall be met for any new building. So the standard in the noise section refers to buildings. The standard in the airport chapter refers to habitable rooms. So I think from a consistency point of view, yeah, we need to be consistent through the plan, the way that we're dealing with relating it to the standard. And it may well be that on page 304, changing the words in noise standard 3 which read bedrooms or rooms used for sleeping, becomes habitable rooms if that is the intent, because the next line in that rule says other habitable rooms. Oh, okay, so no, ignore that. It's just that there's an inconsistency in the way that we've dealt with it, or the way that it's dealt with in the plan. The number 3 of Rule 9 says any activity complies with the standards. Well, the standards appear to relate to buildings rather than activities. So I'm just wondering whether the word activity is needed. So if you could just give that some thought and come back to me, please. In Standard 1, which is on page 6, it refers to outdoor storage areas must not encroach on airfield areas. There is no definition of airfield areas. In number 2, the very last line refers to species which grow to at least 1.5 metres. Are we talking about the height or width? And I think the intent is that where you're talking about screening, the words which grow to a height of 1.5 metres. And if there's no streams and rivers in the zone, do we need standard 4? So that's all I had on import.
Just a question, Keith. The defined area, would that be taken care of with mapping of the airport, spatial mapping?
I think that standard's sort of designed to mean the actual runway. So no, yeah, we can look into that.
Thank you. We're on to the next one, which is town centre zone. Response to Sabitas.
So is there any further evidence in terms of the report on the centre zones?
So the main one was what Ruth presented in relation to Standard 1. We also have a submission in relation to setbacks from the rail corridor. It's one of those that KiwiRail has submitted in all zones. From the further evidence they provided, they're satisfied with what we've provided with setbacks in the sport and active recreation, so it's really the commercial and mixed-use zones they're still concerned about. Do you want me to run through that now, or did you want to? Yeah, okay. So KiwiRail requested a 5-metre setback to the rail corridor. And in Appendix 3, you will see there's a map there that shows what that 5-metre setback would look like. And if you look in...
Just wait for us to catch up.
Yeah, sure. I've done little snips as well in the supplementary evidence, or paragraph 50, if you want to see little cutouts.
Can you hold up what Appendix 3 looks like, please?
Appendix 3 is the KiwiRail, in the report there here, and then you got the overview map with...
So
That's, yes, that's right. There's one for Gore and one for Matara. So in the Section 42A report, we came to the conclusion that we didn't have sufficient detail from KiwiRail about why they want a 5 metre setback. We've noted this, especially in relation to on Main Street in Gore. You know, some of these sites are only 10 to 15 metres wide, so to have a 5 metre setback would be a relatively big imposition to landowners. So we asked for further details from them why they need 5 metres. And they've also provided a Section 32AA evaluation about why it's necessary. And it's basically to protect their infrastructure from people trespassing onto the rail corridor when they're doing building maintenance, and so to protect the infrastructure and people's safety. Having setbacks to infrastructure, you know, it's done across the plan. KiwiRail also have their area of designation to protect their infrastructure, but to have that kind of boundary control, I agree that there is some merit in that. But I'm of the opinion that we need to balance that with people to be able to use and develop their land as well. So KiwiRail has provided in their evidence a diagram in their Appendix A. It shows some pictures of scaffolding and an object falling, and they've made some assumptions in there. Looking at that, I'm not quite sure about the trajectory of this falling object and how likely that actually would be. It seems to be certainly a worst case scenario, and also being able to walk around the scaffolding in that way, it seems like maybe this setback could actually be reduced. So what I'm recommending, because in the commercial centre zones there's only setback on some boundaries with the residential zone, heritage items and parks and reserves, but my recommendation is that we include a rail corridor in that, and that would give for the town centre and local centre zone, that would be a 2 metre setback with a rail corridor. So it would protect, it kind of achieve the outcomes that KiwiRail is seeking, but with a lesser imposition on the individual landholder. So we've, at paragraph 56 of our supplementary evidence, you can see I've just taken out the different commercial and mixed-use boundary controls and different heights of buildings. So this has come up in other recent plan changes and district plans, and it seems to be a bit of a mixed response nationally. Some councils have accepted the 5 metre setback, others have rejected it, and then other people have said just the normal boundary setback will apply. So the normal boundary setback is my recommendation that we adopt. Yes, so I think that strikes a better balance with what KiwiRail is seeking and to protect private property rights. So that is probably the main ones that have come up for the town centre.
Thank you for that, very useful.
So what you're saying is the distance between the railway line
and the boundary that is there now is quite variable. Some are 15 metres, others might be less.
Yeah, so what they're seeking, so they said the rail corridor in their submissions. We weren't quite sure did they mean the actual railway tracks, because that seems to be the area of most concern, and but it's not, it's from their boundary, so their designation boundary. So this would be the private property boundary that they're seeking the setback from. And that's the other consideration, is that Kiva Rail's designation is quite wide. In some places, especially in Gore, it's between 50 and 100 metres wide. It has buildings, ancillary areas. So yeah, it's not all areas are of equal risk, I suppose. But yes, so no, the setback they want is from the private property boundary. So we'll go into private property for 5 metres, but what we're saying is that you can probably do property maintenance with 2.
At paragraph 25 on page 11 refers to Gore and Mataura deemed to be a Tier 3 urban environment. What does that mean, and what are its implications in terms of the process we're in now?
Sorry, you're in the section 42?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. What paragraph did you say?
25.
So this is in relation to the MPSUD?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, so Gore and Mataura is combined because they're a urban environment, so the MPSUD applies as a Tier 3.
What's a Tier 3 and what are its implications?
Oh, so it's defined in the MPSUD. Thank you, Mishka. So they've listed different urban environments, and it has to do with basically the number of people. So Tier 1s, I believe, are like Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. Tier 2 urban environments are Nelson, Tasman kind of areas, and then Gore is at Tier 3.
Maybe I can help here in terms of implications. So Tier 1 councils or areas, the bigger councils, in terms of the MPSUD, have certain requirements to meet minimum heights and those sorts of things, whereas Tier 3 urban environments like Gore and Mataura combined, the policies and objectives generally in the MPSUD apply, but those minimum density requirements aren't applicable to Tier 3 councils. So there's an expectation that you'll intensify as much as you have to in order to achieve growth targets, but there's no minimum heights that apply to Tier 3 councils. There may be some other implications, and we can bring that information back if that's useful. You might recall that as a result of Gore and Mataura combined being an urban environment, there's regular reporting, annual reporting in terms of how the council's going at achieving its overall growth targets, and so you get a report now annually at the end of the financial year, start of the next financial year, about how the council's going at achieving those overall growth targets in terms of number of people and number of jobs, etc.
And it also has implications in terms of parking.
That's correct, so no parking requirements.
there is a little hiccup in the reports, in the numbering of the tables. So table 3 appears twice on page 21, which should be 4, which then puts out the numbering in the report. Just to highlight, just for the benefit of others when you're reading it. The paragraph 76 refers to the mixed-use zone, and it really comes from the FENS submission relating to where there isn't reticulated water and wastewater on site. And the question that came from the panel really was along the lines of, is all of the mixed-use zone within council's reticulated area?
Yes, so we have provided some maps showing the reticulated services for the mixed-use zone within the supplementary evidence. So that came through this morning, so you probably haven't had a chance to look at that. But if you've got the maps, there should be one for each mixed-use zone area. They look a bit like this. They've got a sort of pink. Yeah, that's right. So the majority of these areas do appear to have reticulated services, but there's some sort of edge areas, particularly if you go to the Gore North map, for example. If you look at the cutout right at the sort of northern side end of Hokanui Drive, where there's mixed use zone, you know, that very northern part, if somebody were to develop in there, it's possible that they may not have a reticulated services. Also, if you look at the Gore East plan, there's a little area. They're quite small areas, and they're the areas that are right on the edge of the zone.
If we look at the Gore North one first.
Yes, sure.
At Cobham Street, the services are on the other side of the road, and the same way the Green Line would cross the road for all those ones on the right-hand side as you head north, so would the Blue Line. So it appears to me that all of the zone is actually included in the reticulated area.
Yeah, the only bit I was looking at particularly was if you just look at the little cutout map, there's a it's a pretty small area. It's sort of questionable whether, you know, I guess it would depend how that was developed as to where you stretch down to meet that reticulated network in the road there.
Well, again, it's on the other side of the road, which is quite normal. You go across the road to connect to it.
Oh, it looks to me like there was a pipe that ran just on the same side of the road for the wastewater. But I could be reading that incorrectly.
Yes, but there's also a wastewater one
Yep,
on the other
correct.
side of the road for the, that old railway land. So it appears in the case of the north that everything is reticulated. If we go to the East Gore, so where are the properties there that aren't reticulated?
If you just look along Toronto Street, right to the end of the mixed-use zone there, the pipes don't quite extend that far. It is possible that they may be able to hook into there. The standard's a bit of a belt and braces standard. Likewise, if you go right to the end of the zone on Ontario Street, again, there's a couple of sections there that are just sort of south of the reticulated network. So the recommendation to include the standard was to be consistent with the approach we've taken in the residential zone, where there may also be some other urban edge areas that don't have reticulated. I mean, essentially it requires people to either connect or provide on-site servicing. So it's given people the option to one or the other. It's just a sort of belt and braces standard to ensure that people adequately consider how their sites are going to be serviced.
Okay, so on Toronto Street, it's the one property all the way along between Dundas Street and the edge of the zone. So as you see the stacks there.
south of Toronto Street.
Yeah, I'll come to South Lamo.
Oh, sorry.
Right, so in south of Toronto, you've got a wood chopping place there by the paper road that stretches back and that service. So the only one that isn't is the one on the right-hand side of that paper road. And I'd be curious to know whether in fact that is owned by the council and is part of the adjoining land.
I can certainly find that out for you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Keith, are you talking about this little area up here?
This one here,
Down. Oh, this one here.
just before the tip side.
Who would own that area up here? Is that because it's between the
Yeah, you've got the railway line and
river,
State Highway.
State Highway here? That block
yeah, it's
of-
outside the zone though, it's outside the red area. So if it's outside of, the red area is the zone boundary.
It's outside the mixed use
Yes,
zone.
yeah, so it's not relevant.
No.
So I expect that would be zoned rural. In fact, it's part of the tip site.
Mm.
Oh, it could be.
So the rule you're recommending is that the one that's at the top of page 27?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So we're in a mixed use zone. Number 1 refers to any residential unit and buildings for non-residential. Doesn't that just mean all buildings?
Yes, probably. For consistency's sake, we use the same standards that's in the general residential zone.
You'll be getting to them later.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's fine.
yeah. Let's simplify things if we
Yeah,
can.
I mean, I think you'd probably want to sort of have it so it's a building for an activity. You wouldn't necessarily need any building. You know, a garage, for example, doesn't need to connect. So a building, I guess, that's
Yeah, so
used for a specific purpose that might require, you know, reticulation.
well, can you give some more thought, because a garage is a non-residential activity in the mixed-use zone potentially,
I think.
or a storage shed.
Oh, I was meaning, sorry, a garage associated with a residential unit, so that would come under.
So what's the
residential
definition
activity.
of residential unit? Does it include a garage?
I believe, bear with me one moment, and I will have a look for you.
And I guess another style thing while you're looking that up is that number 2 says shall be connected. Number 3, the last word is must. So we've got an inconsistency in the way that we deal with shall and must through the plan, and it'd be nice to get them all the same.
Yep. Yeah, so the definition of residential unit means a building or part of a building that is used for a residential activity exclusively by one household and must include sleeping, cooking, bathing and toilet facilities. So I suppose there's probably a separate definition, I believe, of accessory building. So that's a residential unit. The definition of residential activity means the use of land and buildings for people's living accommodation.
So what if there is an attached, like a hairdressing salon or beauty salon or something like that, which there are a few around town?
Yes, so if that would need a reticulate or, you know, some means of providing for service, you know, Three Waters servicing. So I guess that would be captured by the non-residential activities part of the rule. Yeah. So it's sort of trying to capture residential, but also activities that aren't residential, but maybe not capture buildings that, you know, like a garage that you use, you have on your house site that you wouldn't necessarily need water and wastewater to connect to.
And when I look at numbers 3 and 4, it says if you're unavailable, you must be connected to community drinking water, of which there's none in this zone. Private drinking water supply, there's none in this zone. And down later, must be provided for on-site wastewater treatment and disposal. And we're dealing with probably only one very small section. So why don't we have a rule that simply says in the mixed-use zone, thou shalt be connected to the council's reticulated water supply?
You could have that rule, yes. If you felt that was a better option, then yeah, this was just to give the option. Equally, you might decide that the rule's not, superfluous or needs.
Just to go back, sorry, Keith.
No, go on.
Keith's already dealt with this, but I did have to ask you a question. Why you've chosen 45,000 litres if you're not hooked up to council supply? Does that come from another standard, the 45,000 litres? It's a very odd.
Yeah, so the 45,000 litres was taken from the FENS standard around providing for on-site firefighting. It's not perfect in that that is for more of like a residential use, and commercial uses may require more or less. Part of, I guess, the sort of in response to the FENS submissions, and then also trying to grapple with which zones have the servicing condition and which don't, there is instances where we're covering quite a lot of land that is, I guess, different in circumstance and environment. Like, for instance, the mixed-use zone, more often than not, the area is a little bit more built up, but there are areas that aren't connected as such at the moment, versus the residential zones where this standard is also present, and that is to acknowledge the fact that we've got areas that are either proposed to be zoned large lot residential, for instance, and they might not have reticulated services yet. So yeah, granted, the standard needs a bit of interrogation, and I guess the plan is to do that in the residential zones because it's a lot more relevant. So in terms of that 45,000 litres, originally it's come from the firefighting standards, but part of our sort of request back to FENS is that, if they want to have a different standard or look into the standard more, then we need a bit more from them about what their standards that they want to use, because they've proposed to include their entire code of practice, which is extremely long and technical. So yeah, there is a need to interrogate the rule further, and there is an intention to do that through the residential zones. Just in terms of that relevant factor, but originally the 45,000 litres was coming from the FENS standard.
The problem with 45,000 litres is you can't purchase a relocatable tank that's 45,000 litres. They're 30,000 litres, so you're basically saying 2 tanks. So sometimes you can't fit that in around a residence. So maybe that standard's not achievable in all circumstances. It's quite an awkward number.
Yeah, no, I do understand that. We have had submissions on that, especially as the firefighting requirements are different depending on the size of your building. So, for example, if your building's less than 200 metres squared, I think you actually need a lot less storage. So, yeah, the 45,000 litres and the potentially difficulties or problems with it in terms of how you then need 2 tanks will be looked at through the residential zones.
On pages 27 and 28, there's a whole lot of additions recommended relating to landscaping not obscuring emergency or safety signage. The other parts of those rules says thou shalt provide landscaping along the front boundary. If you provide landscaping along the front boundary, then you're obscuring the view into the property and therefore obscuring the view of the emergency provisions that you're trying to protect when you read the rule the way it's written. So if some more thought can be given to that, please. I think the intent is if you were doing landscaping adjacent to any emergency connections or signage, that the landscaping shall not obscure it.
Sorry, can you just explain a little bit more what you're thinking there? I just had a slightly different vision in my mind of what it was. I'd just like to understand
so
what you're
part one of the
thinking.
rule says thou shalt landscape their front boundary.
Right.
The moment you provide landscaping that you can't see into the property, you're obscuring any views of the safety equipment that may be on the building. So I think the intent...
Okay, I understand what you're saying, yeah.
The intent is just around where the stuff is.
Yep, okay, thank you. That's helpful.
At paragraph 100, in relation to the Environment Southland submission, I just want to flag that there is a rule, natural hazards R2, and it will come up later, that says that a certain design standard, unless otherwise directed by the Southland Regional Council Planning Department. I want to flag I have doubts over the validity of such a rule. And that it also doubts on the validity of a rule that says recommendations take precedence over the rule in the plan. In paragraph 152, Woolworths support supermarkets being a permitted activity and seeks they be retained. So they're supporting, I guess, supermarkets being limited in size to 100 square metres.
They are a permitted activity in the outer area at any size.
So this only the rule only applies then to the main street.
The standard that limits the size, yes, that's only on the pedestrian, like in the commercial core on the main street. That's the only place where the square meterage of retail activities are limited, yes.
This may be a question that probably or possibly is better later. Paragraph 171, Heritage New Zealand is supportive of the implementation of targeted precincts which provide for consideration and protection of the wider historic character of the area. And in the town centre main street context, what is the historic main characteristics of the historic character? And I guess to help it along, to me, it's continual frontage of buildings. It's the two-storey height of buildings that we've got through 90% plus of the zone. We don't have colour controls, but council promotes good design, etc., through that way. So I guess in terms of the height of buildings, trying to understand why there are no controls over what the frontage of buildings look like on the main street.
So there are controls about if you want to do an alteration above the facade on the main street, then that would be considered through a resource consent process. but if you want to do alterations, or not above the facade, what am I saying, above the veranda. At veranda or floor level, a lot of the shops have been altered. They've got big shop windows, and that's good from an urban design perspective. So the rules try and keep that. But then if you're making any changes to that facade, which you're talking about heights and those things, then you would go through a resource consent process where you consider the character of that building and the buildings between them, and how it can join in.
Right, so if you're putting up a new building,
You would need a...
you can do it at one story if you wish in the main street.
No, a new building, that's for alterations of existing buildings is what I was talking about. So for a new building, I believe you would need a consent. I'll have to double check for you just.
Yeah, if you can come back to me, I just, because the operative plan talks about having a consistent height of buildings in the main street, and I don't see that carried over into the proposed plan.
No, that's right. No, it hasn't been. There is no minimum height requirement. There's a maximum height requirement.
Yes,
of course.
yes.
Yep.
The report writers, I guess at pages 49 onwards, probably should be aware that at 187 we talk about Carlton Rise, at 189 Charlton Rise. I think the correct one is with a C and an H, isn't it, Cliff? Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that should be Charlton, of course.
Now we're going to hear from Ronald Ashby, and I'll keep some questions relating to his submission and the way that it's been summarised. Paragraph 239. In the context used, what does the second to last word of the first line mean?
Sorry, second to last word of the chapeau.
Yes.
So that's if you've got a policy. So if I can just come over, it's probably easier to show you. This is this part of the policy here, the header part. Before you've got the numbers, this is the policy chapeau.
Okay.
It's like, I think chapeau is French for hat. So
Yes, it is.
The header
Yes.
of the policy.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. And sorry, if I could just point out that at paragraph 244, where there's a section 32AA in relation, it's just over the page from where we just were, that is actually an error. That 32AA should just be struck out. Apologies, I didn't recommend any changes, so if you could just strike out that section 32AA that's on page 59.
So that's all paragraph 244.
Yes, correct. If you could just strike that out, please.
I might jump in if you don't mind. There were a couple of errors in relation to the town centre zone. So there is a recommendation in the report on paragraph 150, and unfortunately that wasn't shown in the Appendix A, which is the chapter for the town centre zone. It's been corrected, and it's correct in the supplementary evidence Appendix 2. And the definition of service station was also not included in an Appendix A, also included now in Appendix 2. So,
Okay, so that will come up at the next hearing because the Hokanui Runanga are appearing.
yes, that's correct.
Yes,
That's
okay.
correct.
Yeah. In paragraph 265, talking about education facilities. So the PDP currently provides for education as a restricted discretionary activity, providing guidance on when such an activity may be appropriate. Schools are typically covered by designations, and as such the rules would not be applicable. But we have private schools here in town. So given that we have private schools, does the recommendation need to change?
I don't think I would recommend changing the activity status. The sole, the fact that there are designations wasn't the primary reason for my recommendation. The primary reason was as set out in paragraphs 264 and 266, in that schools are typically best suited in the communities that they serve, and that tends to be a residential zone. Although the mixed-use zone does provide for some residential activities, that's not the sole purpose of the zone. And because the nature of the zone is sort of quite varied in terms of activities, there are probably better places that schools are sited. But the restricted discretionary activity status is a sort of middle ground. It does, it's not saying that they would be inappropriate, but it's just saying a little bit more thought would be needed as to, their siting in the zone.
Good, thank you. I think it might have been a little slip of the finger when typing at paragraph 268, where that bit in red, minor residential units have a maximum floor area, so that implies that you're allowed more than one on a site. I think just the S that needs to come off.
Yep,
Yes,
acknowledge.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll probably add an A then in front of, and then change the have to has.
Affect 263 as well.
Yes, it would. We can provide an updated appendices A with the chapter as part of a right of reply.
Oh, that one's fine. We can do that one. So turning to Appendix A, and I'm on page 4 of the Town Centre Zone, Precinct C3, Policy 5. Avoid activities that require larger floor plates. Does that need to be a little bit clearer as part 1? And part 2 is avoid on-site car parking activities. Now, in town, we've got a number of places that have the parking at the rear, not at the front. So should this be modified a little
So
bit?
in relation to car parking activities, that's a commercial car park. So it wouldn't be ancillary parking for a shop. So we have a specific definition of it. It's just that we wouldn't want to see commercial car parks as money-making activity as a...
That's simple.
Yeah.
Right. But do we need to clarify what larger floor plates are?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I can consider some alternative wording for that one.
So turning to page 8 of the Town Centre Zone, Rule 11, all areas, entertainment and hospitality is permitted where the activity is totally in a building. So that excludes street tables and dining outdoors, of which there are a couple of sites potentially that could have it at the rear of the building getting the afternoon sun.
Yes, so there is a food and beverage activity, so that's more for your restaurants and cafes. The entertainment and hospitality is more pubs, nightclubs, that kind of activity. And that's why we're trying to keep them in buildings so there is not excessive noise and there might be effects on the neighbours. So if someone has like outdoor dining, that should come under the Yeah, rules, sorry. Thank you, Mishka.
Okay. Entertainment and hospitality areas have outdoor smoking areas. How are they then be provided for? You certainly don't want them on the street frontage, but they need to be provided for by law.
Okay. Yep. I can have a look into that.
Then precinct 3 on the next page, page 9, building activity permitted. So it talks about any building construction, erection, demolition, alteration. So what's the difference between construction and erection?
I suppose construction is the activity of building.
And so in the heading as well, it talks about demolition, provided that you don't remove the building. And it also talks about construct a new building. So it's just the way that that's kind of worded as, yeah.
Yes, I mean, because you can do, you can obviously demolish parts of a building and not the whole building as well. I suppose it was trying to acknowledge that if you actually demolishing the whole building, then that would need to be considered.
Okay, then in the white column, it's controlled if you don't comply, and the first number is number 3. So there's a little hiccup in the numbering there, which is carried forward to the bottom of the page.
Actually, that is intentional. I can understand if it's maybe a little bit confusing. So the permitted activity condition is 1, and then if you scroll down onto page 10, then you've got number 2. And then it goes to 3 for a controlled activity. So it was to not have too many ones. If you're referring to it as Rule 13.1, then there would be multiple ones. So that was intentional to go 1, 2, 3.
All right. Now, why have we got orange?
So we tried to use it to make it easy for plan users. We tried to use a traffic light system. So permitted activities are green, and then the managed activities are yellow. So you kind of know, and then obviously if you get into red, you're, you should be thinking about what you're doing. But yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, standard 1 on page 13. I'm thinking of the warehouse scenario where they have, and probably other stores do it as well, they actually sublease space within their building. So the photographic thing in the warehouse isn't actually operated by the warehouse people, it's operated by another operator. So is that a tenancy? So I guess the purpose of my question is, what is a tenancy? Do we need to define it?
I can certainly look at that. Yes, so the intention with referring to tenancies were for those on the main street. There is, for example, that old department store, and that could have multiple tenancy in it, even though it's the one building. So it was trying to distinguish between the physical building and the activity that takes place in it. Does that make sense?
Yes. So it's a bit like going into a mall where you've got one building, but you've got a whole lot of different tenancies.
Yes, I suppose, in a way,
But
yes.
in the mall situation, they've got a physical wall between them.
Yeah.
In the warehouse situation, there's no dividing wall.
Yes, correct.
So what was the point you were making, Keith?
What does tenancy mean?
That's a big question.
I'll move to Neighbourhood Centre Zone, Appendix A. So again, on page 6, again, rules 8 and 9, the numbering starts 3, 4 in the left-hand side, 5, 6, 7 and 8 on the other side.
Right, that would be an error. Yeah, that's not intentional.
Right.
I will correct that. Thank you.
Through to page 9, NCZ Standard 1, number 4, talks about plantings reach a maximum height of 1.5 metres. If I go to Standard 6 on page 13, it says a fence shall be 1.6, a maximum height of 2 metres. So if you put in landscaping, you've got, and even above, sorry, the planting shall be between 1.5 and 2, whereas back on page 9, maximum height of 1.5. So I think an inconsistency there in the same zone.
Yes, sure. Yeah, that can be corrected. Yes.
Okay, over to Standard 10 on page 15, hours of operation for visitor accommodation. These hours apply to reception and servicing areas only. So between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. are the hours of operation. The visitor accommodation next door to me provides meals to people, breakfast, before 7 o'clock in the morning. So I just question the hours that we've got there and whether in fact we've actually got the ability to change that.
Yeah, we haven't had any submissions.
Yeah.
Well, apart from fire and emergency, didn't want to comply with it. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. The intention is, of course, to try and keep the residential or consistent with the residential character when you would expect people to be up and about. But yes, I can look at that.
And I don't know if there's the opportunity of altering the one on page 6, which relates to home businesses. Number 5 refers to receiving customers' deliveries between 07:30 and 7 p.m. Elsewhere, the time period for in residential areas is 0700. So I don't know if there's any submissions on that we can tidy it up and make it consistent.
I suppose it's, yes, you say it's a consistency thing, so it's more of a correction rather than a material change.
If you're happy with us to change it under clause 16.2, that would be good.
So that's all the standards in relation to hours of operation
Yes.
should be all 700.
Now the next one's on page 13, standard number 6, and we've had this one come up before over another issue. For sites fronting Hokanui Drive, the landscaping strip must contain a minimum of 1 tree every 3 metres. What is a tree?
Are you in the mixed use zone there?
Sorry?
Sorry, are you in the mixed use zone chapter there?
Oh, yes it is.
That's
Yes.
What is a tree?
I assume you're talking about a plant that grows to a height of at least. And given that we've got a recommendation to include a rule on landscaping, we may be able to tidy that one up at the same time.
Yeah, we can certainly have a look at this. Let's see if we have a definition of what a tree is, but it seems unlikely. Yeah, well, we can have a look at that as part of the right of way.
Now, for the author of the local purpose zone, Appendix A, you'll be pleased that I have no questions on it. Which is all from me on those zones.
No questions for me.
So the next one then is field days in Camp Columba. Now, Camp Columba, we've got the submitters turning up on that one. So I'm wondering if we hold our discussion on that until they're here as well. And I had nothing on field days, Cliff. Oh, yes, I did. So I'm looking at the field day zone and Camp Columba zone report on page 26. And in the big paragraph at the top, dealing with Rule 3, I've highlighted number 2, the activity must not take place within 12 metres of the base, etc. Elsewhere in that table, that one is crossed out. So is that just an omission?
Yes. Yeah, that needs to be crossed out as well.
And I look forward to the discussion that takes place on the infrastructure chapter as to whether it has precedence.
Oh, actually, sorry, Keith, just looking at that one again. So that was a copy of what the submitters have actually asked for in terms of, so I think it was a mistake on their part in terms of them not crossing it out. But then if you go to the recommendation, I have crossed it out in the recommendation.
Oh, good you.
Paragraph 103.
Yeah.
What page is that?
Page 28. Right, so it was the submitter's fault. Looking at the Appendix A for the field day zone. Rule number 5, page 5, says the activity is ancillary to an event. Elsewhere in that zone, it refers to a temporary event. So I think it's just a word left out of the drafting, and we can change that as a clause 16(2) matter. Then if we go over to page 7, so this is for visitor accommodation, which the heading's on page 6. So it's permitted where it's with a temporary event, and in F talks about the number of toilets and says or approval obtained from council's environmental department. And I severely doubt the validity of giving a delegation to a rule in the district plan.
Yeah, we can have the legal team look at that for you and
Yeah.
come up with an alternative if it's not.
And you see the two colours are on the one page there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to your report, page 26, where it mentions rural commercial recreation activities under state permitted status. Does not involve more than 12 persons in any one group. So that's several separate groups of 12 people are permitted?
Yes.
Okay, right,
Yeah.
thank you.
12 at one time, I guess,
Yep.
per group.
And field days, again then, Appendix 1, page 9, standard number 1. So we're in the field days zone and requiring in number 2 of matters of discretion to have regard to views on the Mataura Falls, which I can assure you are not visible from the field days zone.
Sorry, could you just clarify which rule you're referencing?
Standard number 1 on page 9 of Appendix A. Matters of discretion.
Yeah, the Mataura Falls can be removed. That was likely a consistency thing across the plan in terms of where we were referring to
And I doubt...
significant landmarks.
I doubt Tutorel is visible. It won't be as well. So it'll just be impacts on the Hokanui Hills. Again, do we have any rivers or streams in the field day zone?
Yeah, the Waimumu stream runs down one side of it, I think.
One boundary.
Yeah.
Good, okay. And then standard number 6. It probably needs a tidy up in wording. So on page 12, events for more than 2,500 people must be approved by the Gore District Council. Now, this comes from the conditions of consent that said if you've got a large-scale event, then you've got to get your events management plan and traffic management plan signed off from the council. So I'm just wondering whether, in fact, that can be played with to actually bring it into line of something that's appropriate. You know, what's the process they've got to go through? Is it a controlled activity? Something needs to be made clearer. And numbers 3, 4 and 5 on that same rule were conditions of consent. And if someone can check, I think they have all been met as part of the conditions of consent. So
They haven't,
they haven't?
no.
Oh,
So
okay.
those are in there because obviously we're trying to reconcile the multiple resource consents that they have and reflect them in the plan. And as of now, because those conditions haven't been met, the larger events, we don't want to go ahead until they've upgraded those vehicle standards. When they do, those rules effectively fall away. But at this point, that's why they're in there.
So how do they get on with existing use rights?
Well, they don't have any existing use rights. They've got a resource consent that they've got conditions that they need to comply with. And we're in contact with them in terms of monitoring and helping them achieve these conditions, but that's why they're in that plan at the moment.
Cliff, under the previous term of council, didn't council actually offer to pay, given that we had COVID and can you help us out, do you know a bit more about it?
In terms of whether or not council offered to pay for their vehicle upgrades, I don't know, and I'm not in a position to.
Right.
I can have a look into it for you.
Yeah, because that
yeah.
consent was issued prior to COVID lockdown,
Yeah,
so they didn't have the field days 1 year,
yeah, I understand
and
that.
therefore
Yeah.
didn't get the money in to do it. So I thought council actually offered to do something. I don't know if our general manager of critical services knows anything about it at the back there.
Oh, to assist the Field Days Committee through that process.
Yeah.
It would be the logical thing to do, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, we can definitely have a, like I can discuss in terms of because the resource consent and those conditions, obviously that resource consent has been given effect to and the conditions are in place. So we can have discussions with the owners and operators, and we have been sort of through the process, because obviously the best outcome for everyone is that the vehicle accesses get upgraded.
Okay, well, that's all I've got for that one, Cliff. Next one relates to open space and recreation zone report.
Right, and that's basically Dollamore Park and is it the Dock Estate?
Can I just, before we move on, just a question, page 35, number 129, it says the legend should be updated. Should that be legend? I'm not aware of that word.
So it's on the structure plan, they've got like a little key that I call the legend, but I guess you could call it a key as well. Sorry, I don't know why I'm doing that because it's in the top right hand side of the page. If you've got Appendix A with the Camp Columba zone, they've got just here on the structure plan, they've got a little thing there, it's hard to read from here, but
Oh,
it's the legend.
okay, that's a legend.
So yeah, it's just, they've got numbers on the structure plan here and the legend sets out what the numbers are.
Thank you for explaining that. That's something new I've learnt today.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just use the word that they've used there.
Anyone got anything before natural open space appendix A?
I do have, I've just got to refresh my memory. If anybody else has got questions, please carry on.
For your info, the overview and purpose of natural open space zone includes material out of the Council's reserve management plan. A team from Council has updated the reserve management plan provisions. Those 10,000 people was about 25 years ago, and it's probably worthwhile having a look at the updated version, which is probably not coming formally to Council for another month or so. But just to make you aware that what is in the intro is a little bit out of date now.
Yes, I do have a question. DOC have submitted an opposition to rural agriculture, horticulture and pastoral activities be permitted activities within the natural open space zone to be consistent with the conservation management strategy. I can see the two different activities, but how do DOC work and maintain? There's concern from neighbouring landowners that DOC need to attend to noxious weeds and various things like that. How can DOC undertake that work without provisions for them to do it, or do they have the statutory right to carry on and do things?
Yeah, so DOC do have the statutory right to carry on and undertake activities that's in accordance with their own reserve management plan. So the note that we've added to the start of the chapter clarifies that. And what we also have included in the chapter is a rule that enables activities to be permitted that are in accordance with the Gore District Council Reserve Management Plan. So it means that no one can undertake those agricultural activities unless they align with what our reserve management plans allow for. So when I was considering the submission from DOC about restricting those rural activities, I had a discussion with Keith McRoby, who is the Parks and Recreation Manager here, and we made sure that even if we took that rule out specifically, the council could still undertake activities that aligned with their reserve management plan, which may involve rural activities in order to maintain the land and get to areas that might not be easily accessible, so through with sheep grazing and things like that. In terms of requiring DOC to undertake activities on their land to help with pest management and things, we're probably a bit restricted in what we can require them to do, but then they can, based on their own reserve management plans.
Look, I can't point to the exact reference, but I think there was some point made by Doc about reverse sensitivity to neighbouring areas, which of course are rural, and agricultural activity. I would, but I also assume that DOC do not have the statutory right to place impediment on neighbouring activity.
Yeah, so if the neighbouring zone is rural, then the rural chapter will govern their activities on that land. So people will be able to do their agricultural activities on rural zone land.
I just wondered if we should itemise like the animals in this natural space zone. If you put deer or cattle or something like that in there, it would absolutely destroy them. So how do we cover?
Yeah, so the recommended changes have actually removed the ability of animals to graze in the zone. They would only be allowed to graze in the zone in the area that was managed by council if it aligns with our reserve management plan, which is Commissioner Havell said has just been revised, and I'm pretty sure, well, based on the previous plan, I haven't seen full copies of the new drafts, but it was only sheep that were allowed to be grazed.
Yep. I find it interesting in the zone on page 13 that total building coverage on the site is allowed up to 2.5% of the area of the zone. And if we have a zone of, what, 79 hectares? And I couldn't find anything that enabled that to be altered.
Well, every building needs a resource consent in the zone. So you would be looking, and then the matters of discretion of that building activity includes things like building it within the natural landforms and how best the buildings can be sited. So obviously if a building came in and it was proposed to be huge, there would probably, well, it would be questioned and assessed through the resource consent process.
Okay, so that's rule 11 then, is for building the consent.
Yeah.
Okay, that follows.
For the purpose of this section, which is significant natural areas, there's identification of SNAs, that only pertains to these areas, not other zones, isn't it?
Where's the reference, sorry, in the chapter that you're referring
National
to?
Planning Instruments, NPS, identifies national methodologies, identify natural areas, SNAs, and requires protection and management of subdivision use and development within SNAs. So I am assuming that that is within reference within the open space zone.
Yeah, there's likely, so the SNAs currently, as they're described in the plan, they're not mapped, they're described, and the eco chapter manages those areas. So whilst it's likely that there will be significant natural areas within the natural open space zone, we still have focused those rules into that eco chapter so that you would look at that as a whole with this natural open space chapter, rather than sort of scattering them between the area specific chapter, which is this natural open space, and the ecology and indigenous biodiversity chapter. It sort of sits on top as a district-wide chapter.
Thank you.
only other thing I've got, sport and recreation zone. Shall I ask why you're looking at that? In the Appendix A to the sport and recreation zone, Rule 8 on page 7 of Appendix A refers to visitor accommodation as in a temporary structure. There's no definition of temporary structure. Our local camping ground has just brought in some cabins that he's put on the site for the next 3 months or for a slightly longer period. Is that a temporary structure? Do we need a definition in the plan of temporary structure?
Yeah, we might need to look into that in terms of, because we don't want it to be unnecessarily restrictive.
Yeah.
But obviously it's difficult when you kind of, you can go down a bit of a rabbit hole of what's okay and what's not. So I guess the idea of that visitor accommodation, including campgrounds rule, is to enable more of those instances of the campgrounds themselves obviously are more permanent, but if you've got events and I know there's freedom camping as well on some of these areas, so we just want to make sure that we're capturing those. But yeah, I'll definitely have a look at that temporary. If maybe there's a better way that we can describe it, so that we're enabling the campgrounds, but not enabling sort of a permanent, additional permanent campgrounds.
Yeah. Okay, that's all from me. I need a break.
I've got nothing, and we're going to handle the Camp Columba zone when the submitters are here.
Yeah.
So we're due for a recess. Okay, thank you very much. We'll recess for